Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome. I'm Kendall for the one of you who doesn't know me. um, and I'm a graduate instructor with the English department and also a graduate assistant with the Center for Teaching Excellence. And we're going to talk about active learning today. Um, but before we dive into that, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the CTE and the services that we offer. We have primarily in the past sort of focused on faculty, but we're opening things up and trying to make like this workshop more resources available and sort of designed with grad students in mind. Um, so the CTE, we sort of are supporting like pedagogical innovation for faculty and grad students. So we do course design, we do teaching observations, we have symposia, events, workshops like today. And I'm actually doing teaching observations for grad students. I'm offering that. So if you would like someone to come in and watch you teach and give you some feedback, or maybe you want to like try something new and get some help designing that and some, impartial feedback on like how it went, you can just email the CTE, and I have our email address in one of the later slides here for you, but it's also just cte@smu.edu. So, but yeah, you can email and request a teaching observation with me. Okay, so we're going to start with what is active learning. This is from the Cornell University Center for Teaching Innovation. We have wonderful resources on our website, but I would also highly recommend checking out Cornell's Center for Teaching Innovation website. They really do have a lot of phenomenal resources that I think like complement the ones that we offer on our website. But this is how they define active learning. Active learning methods ask students to engage in their learning by thinking, discussing, investigating, and creating. In class, students practice skills, solve problems, struggle with complex questions, make decisions, propose solutions, and explain ideas in their own words through writing and discussion. So that's sort of the first part of active learning, is like getting hands-on practice in the class, right? Where you are learning things, but you're practicing those skills. You're also like implementing those skills, applying them. But the other part of this is timely feedback from the instructor. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what that looks like. But students should be, when they're participating in active learning, they should also be receiving timely feedback on that active learning and sort of how they're progressing. And this is helpful for both you and for your students. So just talking a little bit more about the benefits of active learning. So for students, obviously, they're getting significant opportunities to get hands-on practice for key skills and concepts in your course. So they're not just listening to you lecture, right? They're actually doing the thing as well, sort of with your guidance in the classroom. For instructors, this is really useful because it gives you a look at how your students are progressing in real time, right? So you don't have to wait for that summative assessment at the end of a unit or the end of a semester, an exam, a final paper, something like that, where if the students haven't gained those skills the way that you would like them to, it's kind of too late on that assignment by then, right? Instead, when you're doing active learning, you're getting insight into their learning process in real time so that you can step in and make corrections as needed. You can be constantly assessing their learning. There are more benefits though than just these two. So students are going to be processing skills, concepts, terms in class, right? So if they're not understanding something, they can just raise their hand and ask you a question, or they can work through a problem with their peers instead of just sort of being lost and you're not really sure where they are in their learning. They're also going to be applying the knowledge that they're learning during in-class activities. They're going to be connecting concepts in class, right, over time, so that they're also able to personally better connect with the material. They're getting this constant experience with the material. They're going to be interacting, especially with their peers and also with you, which is fabulous, right? If you are used to lecturing and maybe doing a little bit of whole class discussion, you might have that small percentage of students who are constantly interacting with you in the classroom, right? But very often the majority of students will be silent and you won't be having those interactions. Active learning is a really great way to get all of the students interacting with you and with their peers. And like I touched on earlier, the other benefit here is assessment, that students are getting regular sort of low stakes practice opportunities and their learning is assessed through those opportunities. And again, you're able to course correct if you need to before you get to a summative assessment. So some students, I feel like most students are like used to having some active learning in the classroom. But sometimes students can feel that maybe they're having to teach themselves the material. I think we've probably, if you've taught students, you've probably heard this complaint before, right? Like I'm teaching myself, the lecturer is not teaching me enough, or the instructor isn't teaching me enough. Obviously in college, we do expect students to be teaching, right? They're like active parts, an active part of the learning and teaching process. Most of the learning they're doing is happening outside of the classroom, right? And they should be active participants in their learning. But if you're going to do active learning, which I would recommend that you have a statement in your syllabus that tells students why you're doing active learning, right? So you can get ahead of any of those misunderstandings or possible complaints. You should connect the active learning activities that you're doing with your course goals, right? Make that very transparent to students. And in addition to having a statement in your syllabus, I would say you want to talk about this the first day of class, like let students know this isn't going to be a class where I'm just sort of talking at you the majority of the time. You should expect to be an active and engaged participant and to shape your own and others' learning. And you should touch on this like throughout the term to make it very clear that you're doing active learning and why you're doing it, right? This is how we're furthering your learning goals through active learning. So how do you incorporate active learning? It's nothing too complicated, right? You want to have activities that are helping students practice the most skills that are most relevant to your course objectives, right? Not just skills, but concepts, terms, definitions, etc. So these are some examples. We're going to talk about more case studies. You can ask students to collaborate to solve a case study relevant to your field. As someone in English, this isn't something that I have done, but I have seen, especially in the social sciences and STEM classes and like criminal justice classes, this can be really, really wonderful, right? Using a case study.
What is business too?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Concept mapping. This one I have done and it's really effective, especially if you have students who are struggling to understand how the things you're covering week by week are connected, right? And building upon each other. So if you have concept mapping, you can have students draw a concept map showing how course concepts relate to one another with like specific examples from class is the way I've done this. This is very, very helpful. Think, pair, share, an oldie but a goodie. You have students think about something individually. Maybe they're analyzing a passage in class, practicing some problems, whatever you think is going to be beneficial for them to do. Give them some time to do that. Then you're going to have them pair up and swap what they've done with their peers, like discuss it. And then you'll have groups share out. You may not be able to get to all of your groups, and that's okay, especially if you're teaching large classes. You can also kind of experiment with the group size. If you have a very large class, maybe it makes more sense for you to have more students than just two. Great, so that's fine. Yeah, Roseanne.
You can also share live on a Google Doc.
Yeah.
So if you have like more than a few students.
Yes, great point. I did that last term when I was trying to get students to understand what zines are. And so I had them each sort of write their own definitions and bullet points in a Google Doc that I projected. And then we could all talk about what they did. Yeah, great point. Thank you for bringing that. It's really effective. And then peer feedback. This is something I know we do a lot, especially in our writer classes, but I think this works for all kinds of things. Give students like a rubric, clear criteria by which you want them to evaluate an assignment, and have them look at paper drafts, project drafts, etc. Have them give feedback to one another. I've also done this where I've given students anonymized papers from previous courses and had them use my grading rubric to actually grade the paper. It's very fun. The students are brutal. I always tell them you're very lucky. I'm not as harsh a grader as you are. But then at the end, I have them sort of explain how they did the grading process, how they arrived at the grade that they did. And then at the end, I get tell them, great, like you totally understand my grading criteria. So now I expect to see all of this in your papers, right? Some other options, polling. If you have a class of 20 or fewer students, you can use Poll Everywhere for free. We're going to use Poll Everywhere here in just a minute. It is a great tool. It doesn't just do polls. You can do like Q&A. You can make like word maps. It's really wonderful. Students love it. Very, very easy to use. Also a great option if you want to take attendance while doing something else, right? You can have them poll and add their name and you can review that. Close reading and visual analysis. So I have given passages to students to close read. I also really like giving them commercials. They love to rip apart a commercial and sort of what's going on rhetorically. But you could do this with all kinds of things, right? Anything that you want a student to really get involved in analyzing, communicating their analysis to others, right? And responding to other people's analysis. This is going to be really helpful. Writing prompts. This can be really fun. Ask students to write a response to a problem or question as if they are the expert so that you can gauge their knowledge. Students like writing as experts, right? And it does give you a lot of insight into how they're understanding the topic at hand so far. I can also make these slides available to everybody who attended. So just if you're taking notes, but you would like the slides too, I can do that. Drawing and diagramming, have students work together to draw or diagram a problem, concept, or space. I did this when I was working with Dr. Dixon Carr for a speculative fiction class. We had the students work in groups to draw what they thought this spaceship from the future looked like. And it's a great way to see what students are picking up on in a text, but again, very applicable regardless of discipline. And then brainstorming or free writes. I give a lot of guided free writes. They're very, very helpful to ask students to free write or brainstorm short answers or lists in response to a question, problem, or concept. You can see how these are super easy to implement in the class, right? If you want to give students 6 minutes to free write about something, and then you can talk a little bit about what they free wrote about, how it's going to be useful in the future, or you can collect them. Very, very easy, very helpful. So we are going to practice. So first we're going to do think, pair, share. So I'm going to ask each of you individually to think about a skill or concept you could use using active learning that you could use instead of lecturing, right? Because that's the thing with active learning. You have to take away some of the lecture time and implement these activities instead. So think about a skill or concept you could teach using active learning instead of lecture. What activity do you think would best help students learn the skill or concept? What stumbling blocks do you foresee? So I'm going to give you, we'll say 5 minutes. Just think individually, jot down some notes, and then I'm going to ask you to pair up and discuss. Okay? Mm-hmm. Great thing about Canva, if you want a timer, you just hit the number that you want on the keyboard and it pops right up for you. Isn't that nice? I did it accidentally the other day when I was lecturing in Sam's class and I was like, I don't know what this is, but this is great. This is so useful.
Yeah, it's like I've never noticed, like, I
Yeah.
know it's not a PowerPoint feature, but it should be, look at that.
Canva can do everything. I just wanted to put these activities back up here for a minute in case it's helpful. I realize we talked about a lot of things. It can be difficult to remember all of them. How's everybody doing? Okay, so I'm gonna ask you to pair up with the person next to you, nearest you, and discuss what you wrote. What's your idea? Why did you choose that concept or that active learning strategy? How do you think it'll work? Okay, let's come back together. I want to hear what you all were talking about. I think we'll start with Ali and Roseanne. Sounded like you were working through some interesting ideas.
So kind of talking about before we started. I'm teaching Leslie Marmon Silko's ceremony class this week, and I'm concerned about, based on the past few weeks, about my students not following in terms of like reading comprehension, but also in terms of like thematics, like how the novel is structured and how it like relates to Tayo's psychology. And so I was thinking of giving them kind of like a combination of a close reading and a diagramming exercise where I give them like different passages from the novel. Because the novel is broken up into like little sections rather than chapters, so that relates to like different memories that he has. Then have them kind of diagram when slash where, or if this is a memory or if this is like an actual event. And then talk in groups about like kind of what comes out of having these events or having these kind of scenes follow each other, like thematically, but also like in terms of like relating back to how it shows Tayo's psychology. So I think it would be helpful in terms of like both reading comprehension, but also like thinking critically rather than trying to just like figure out which one's enough and which one's not.
I think that's a fantastic idea. I've done something similar to that with like a theme throughout a text to see
Yeah.
if they could kind of piece it together, and it worked really, really well. So yeah, I'd love to hear how it goes when you implement it.
So folks.
Thank you, Addie. Roseanne, did you want to add anything or?
Yeah, I'm committing for a class that is getting ready for midterm prep.
Mm.
And so I thought. I know, but
Yeah, we can hold this so we can.
So, at any rate, TA, and they're doing midterm prep, and so my idea is 76 students, but to use a random generator and put them into groups of 5. I really appreciate, I really try hard not to let them always talk to their friends.
Mm-hmm.
There's a comfort level there, but there's also a comfort level there. So I try to get that, so to mix them up into small groups of 5 where people can actually share in
Mhm.
a big lecture class, have them come up with potential exam questions. And how are you going to study for this
That's
exam?
great. Yeah, that's fantastic. I love that idea. Okay, let's hear what you all talked about in the back.
So I'm not teaching this semester, but I just came up with like a random thing for my students to talk about. So it's just like, all right, romanticism versus the Enlightenment, sort of like classical, sort of like big broad overview of what's going on there, and just suggesting that I would do like a case study sort of approach slash like close readings, but basically I split the class up into groups and give the groups like different art forms with like an example from different periods, and they would sort of like proliferate descriptions of the 2 different like examples, and then sort of compare and contrast and make some sort of statement about like changes and similarities.
Mm. Yeah, I think that would be great. And I think that might work the way that Roseanne, what you're doing, that could give you some fodder for exam questions. That could be really useful. Yeah, excellent. Oh, great.
Yeah, it's very active. So yeah, I just thought maybe some flashcards with notes, so then they can play with each other and make notes. Who's faster for children who know, and they need to name it for play actually, you know.
Mm. Yeah, I wonder, have you used Quizlet? Quizlet? They can create like digital flashcards. I've had students do it before for like exam prep, but then the students have to they have to kind of collaborate to make those for themselves. Yeah, Quizlet.
This app too.
Yeah, might be useful. I find that students really do well collaborating together to make flashcards. Something about it is just like very fun to them. Yeah, excellent.
Have some online.
Oh, great.
This member is just.
You're my TA today, Constantine.
Lots of Spanish. I used to teach Spanish when I was a TA, and we did lots of games. So we do Kahoots and Jeopardy type thing.
Mhm.
Students just love those things. So I've always found that getting in front of their class or giving them some challenge.
Yeah, games are great. I should have had a whole slide dedicated to them. I've done trivia for like midterm review, which is really fun, but the students have to like make their own trivia questions. Or I don't know, even turning like a sentence, like quote embedding into a game. You can turn almost anything into a game if you just try to think about how you can make these students like duke it out over something that you want them to learn. Thank you. Okay, online.
Yes. This is examples, just private class, getting the students to go to Google Doc to work on formatting workshop.
Yes, yes, a formatting or workshopping. Yeah,
Also diagramming, drawing essay outlines, be helpful.
excellent.
Creating visual representations. My example that I've always liked doing, like there are multiple concepts that I need to cover in one class. There's this method called the jigsaw. And basically put students into home groups, and then they have to learn a particular concept and work with that group and figure out how they're gonna teach the others that concept.
That's
So
great.
they have to learn, teach, and if you create these mixed groups that has one person from each topic, and they have to teach each other those topics. So not only have to learn the concept, figure out how to teach each other, there's always an assessment at the end of the class, but it's, you know, as the instructor, you're designing the activity and they're teaching themselves, right?
Yeah, that's fabulous.
Then the other one was, the big users of word clouds and
Mhm.
using Mentimeter. So Mentimeter is like another kind of polling tool that is popular. Students love it, and having, particularly for shy students, having the answers up on the screen and providing anonymously really provides them a boost of confidence.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so just a couple quick things with Think Pair Share. If you have a very large class where you know you're not going to be able to have every group report out, it's a good idea to walk around the classroom. Or if you think that it's going to be something that's maybe challenging to some students, you want to make sure you're available. Or just general, if you want to walk around, that's fine. The last couple classrooms I've been in have been so small that I couldn't walk around my students. It wasn't an option, but that's usually an option. It's a great one. And like I was talking about earlier, you want to give feedback right away, right? So when students are reporting out to them, to you, to the class, you want to make sure that you know, are actively listening, that you give some feedback, right? You might have some students who, obviously no one in this room, but you might have some students who kind of get off track, and it's great to recognize their efforts, right? And then just gently steer the conversation back. But you want to make sure that you're not just moving from group to group without telling the students anything that can help them assess whether or not they've actually done what you asked them to do, right? So you're not just assessing for your own benefit, but also to encourage them, especially students who are shy. It's really nice to get a little bit of recognition for your contribution. I think, yeah, I want us to do this free write. I did bring paper. Roseanne, if you want a humble piece of paper, I can give it to you, you can use your laptop. But I'd like you to just take a few minutes to write out something about how you would explain the value of active learning to your students. So you could think about this as like prepping for the beginning of class where you're saying it to them, or you could think about a syllabus statement that you can incorporate, just a few sentences, right? Explaining the benefit of active learning and prepping students to really be involved in their own learning in your class. Okay, time's up. So you can absolutely have students report back about free writing. I wouldn't ask a student to read what they wrote though. That can be, especially if they're worried that what they wrote is not grammatically correct or, you know, it's jumbled or whatever. You don't want to put them on the spot to read something that might make them feel a little embarrassed. But you can absolutely ask for them to talk about the ideas that came to them while they were free writing. That can be really helpful. What I do is actually have them turn in their free writes. I have students, before we ever talk about a text, I have them apply like a literary term to the text, you know, tell me how this text is a Bildungsroman or not, or whatever. And then I'll take those free writes and I'll underline ideas that they have that I think would be useful for a summative assessment. So that way they're getting that feedback from me. I always bring them in the next class really quickly, and they can take the free writes and use them to build up their future assignments, which is really useful. But you can absolutely also have them report out what ideas came to you, right? Did you get stuck anywhere? Why? How? Can we work through it together? That can be really useful. Just in the interest of time, I'm not going to have you report out for this one because I do want us to get to pull everywhere. Which fortunately this workshop, I remembered my login. I didn't last time. So if you use this QR code, it should take you to this poll. It's just going to ask you a quick question and there are quite a few answers. So make sure you scroll so you can see them. So we've got polling, drawing, diagramming, close reading, visual analysis, think, pair, share. This can be just a really great, easy way to get students to give you pretty much instantaneous feedback on something. It's really, really useful. Especially if you're like, I don't know, you're explaining something difficult and the students are kind of looking at you with that face where like they could understand, they could totally be on board, or they could be thinking about their homework. They have no idea what's happening, right? But maybe they don't want to ask you a question and reveal that they don't know what's happening. Ask for a poll. They can do it anonymously, right? Do you feel like you have a good grasp on this? Do you feel like you need another example? Do you feel like we need to work through something again? Fantastic. I've also had students just tell me how they felt about a book, which was great because most of the responses were, it was weird, which is a fun poll to see. I do want to show you the other things that Poll Everywhere can do.
You know what I've done before? I put an image of different cats, different, you know, facial expressions, and at the beginning of the class was like, you know, which cat are you today? So like,
yes, that's great. Yes.
Like the cat, I can tell. Like, your cat.
So you can use Poll Everywhere for games, competitions. You can have the students ask you open-ended questions. You can survey the class. You can do a clickable image, Q&A. Word clouds are also really fun. Students love watching the words get bigger as more people are choosing them. Quick, easy, right? It's a simple way to check in with students and have them actually do something in the class.
What is?
Yeah.
It's the third word, I guess, up on there, next to the URL word.
Wait.
Yeah, what is that?
It's
Oh, STEM. It's a STEM thing. Yeah.
It's like word processing and food fancy formulas.
Okay.
Also shiny fabric, they make much.
Yeah.
I was fun with latex, but I heard people telling me latex.
Oh no, it's
What
latex.
is latex?
I don't like latex. I don't like it. Okay, so just some to remind everybody as we're sort of wrapping up here, things to think about. You want your activities to be clearly tied to and advancing your course goals, right? You should always be designing everything with those course goals in mind. Different activities are going to take different lengths of time, right? If you do a think, pair, share on something sort of meaty and you've got 35 students, like you need to budget that into your class, right? Whereas a poll, you can probably throw one of those in anywhere in any class, right? You want to think about student knowledge. You don't have to make active learning activities like super simple, right? But you want something that hopefully students paired up with other peers are going to be able to work through on their own with pretty minimal intervention from you. Although obviously you're there to answer questions, but you don't want to like throw them into the deep end. You want to give prompt feedback, whether that's right after they're finished talking or maybe the next class period, but it needs to be actionable before a summative assessment, right? And you want to show your students that there's a return on their investment of time, right? This is I don't know, I think it's more fun than just listening to a lecture. But you want to get student buy-in, right? So like our statements that we were free writing, you want to think about how you can clearly communicate to your students why you're doing what you're doing. Make sure you set expectations. You want to make sure that students know how much time they have, exactly what they're supposed to do. I wouldn't just rely on verbal instructions, put it on a slide so that the students can reference it, they can see it, right? Have students interact, and you should interact with them at some point, right? And reward participation. I do give like a handful of points for like free writes and some other activities that we do in class. The others don't have specific points tied to them, but they are all under their daily participation score. So I make it very clear to students that like when you're doing these things, you're earning your participation points. A couple of points goes a long way, you know, with our students. They don't want to miss like that 2-point activity. Like they really don't. Yeah.
So how well do these, I think I have an idea what the answer is, but you know, students with accommodations, with learning differences, I know things like Kahoot can be off-putting because some people just, they have slow, I mean, even without diagnosed learning differences, some people are just slower processors. So like, how do these help those students?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're giving students multiple ways to like engage and interact with the course, right? Which is extremely helpful. So hopefully you're hitting sort of things that students need that they wouldn't be getting from like a lecture, especially if someone has like an auditory processing disorder, right? Like it can be very, very helpful to practice. These should be really low stakes so that if somebody is struggling, it's not tanking a grade, right? It's just allowing you to check in. That's really what the point is, right? Give them practice and you can check in on where they are. And I would say most things like you should be able to accommodate, right? Like if a student doesn't want to handwrite on a free writing, that's fine. They can use their laptop, right? Or whatever is easier for them. Kahoot stuff like that, like that's more, I think I've used it more for like making study materials. So maybe if that doesn't work for the student, they want to collaborate with me on like, how can I actually use these to my benefit? I would be fine with that. I haven't run into a whole lot of issues though with it, but I do think like, you know, the good thing with this active learning stuff, not that a lot of it like doesn't take any time or thought, but most of it like should be pretty flexible, right? You should be able to sort of alter things as you need. Yeah. I don't know if that's a satisfying answer, but it's just case by case kind of. So active learning helps with knowledge. It helps them build those skills and concepts in real time. It also helps with retention. Also clarify with my students that it helps with retention, right? Like, no, I'm not making you close read a passage of a novel over and over and over again with your peers because I just think it's like a fun thing to do, although it's obviously very fun to close read passages from books. But also because like your final exam is a close reading exam. So this is what you're going to be doing on your final exam. If you're struggling with it in class, like I need to know so that I can help you so you can do well on your final. I'll retain it, right? You want students to be actually applying the skills that they learned in class, and you want to see that they can implement those skills further on, right? Especially in your summative assessments. Which, just to clarify, if people don't know, a summative assessment is like something you do at the end of the term or the end of a unit. It's like an exam, a paper, a project, right? Something big. We also have formative assessments, which is more like what active learning activities would qualify under, right? These are formative. You're trying to, nobody's grade is writing on this. You're trying to build the skills as you go, rather than just evaluate whether they have them or not. Okay, any questions? We've got 5 minutes.
Well, I think you have the questions and then the suggestion. So there is this strategy called pause procedure that research shows it's beneficial. So if you think about your session, a 15-minute session or a 20-minute session, think about breaking the time that you're lecturing between 12 to 15-minute blocks, and then incorporate an active learning strategy after. Like, don't lecture for the whole time. Always, chunk your lecture into smaller blocks and create an engaging activity with any of these strategies after that, so that the students have the ability to process and also kind of apply what they learned.
That's a great point. Thank you. To add that to the slides for next time. Yeah. Any questions? If you don't have questions, I have, I have my, like I said, I'll make the slides available to you. These are my sources in case you want to check those out. But also we have a survey. If you could take the survey, let me know, was this workshop useful? Could it have been more useful? Are there other topics that you would like to see the CT developing graduate student targeted programming for? Like, I would love to know all of that. And then again, my name and my email address. So if you need anything, just shoot me an email. Thank you all for coming today.